Story 1. Oh man, this moment still makes me cringe every time I think about it. My high school was doing a big talent show, and I signed up to play guitar. I thought it was going to be my epic rock star moment. I'd been practicing the same song for weeks, even picked out a cool outfit just for the performance. But as soon as I started playing, I realized my guitar was completely out of tune. I panicked, but figured I could just keep going and maybe no one would notice. Then, right in the middle of the song, one of my strings snapped, and the noise was just horrible. I was so flustered, I tripped on the amp cord, fell flat on my back, and dropped my guitar. The whole gym went silent for a second, and then everyone just started laughing. The worst part? My friend caught the whole thing on video, and it went viral in our school group chat. To this day, people still bring it up at reunions. I wish I could erase that from everyone's memory, including mine. Edit. Didn't realize so many people would relate. Glad I'm not the only one who's had a rockstar moment go horribly wrong. Story 2. This is hands down the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to me. I was working at my first job, a local coffee shop, and was still getting the hang of things. One morning, the place was packed, and this super cute girl from my school was in line. I was already nervous, but when she came up to the counter, I tried to act cool. Instead of grabbing the whipped cream bottle to top her drink, I accidentally grabbed the milk frother. Without thinking, I hit the steam button, and the milk just sprayed everywhere. All over me, her drink, and even her. She stood there in shock, totally soaked, and I couldn't even think of what to say. The worst part? I just froze, staring at her, while my manager yelled at me to clean up. I've never apologized so much in my life, but she just walked out looking totally annoyed. I still avoid that coffee shop just in case she's around. Story 3. Okay, this one makes me shudder. Back in college, I had a huge crush on this girl in my biology class. We were assigned to a group project together, so I thought it was my chance to impress her. I decided to text her and make plans to study together. But instead of sending the message to her, I sent it to our group chat, where the professor was also a member. And the message wasn't just a quick, "Let's study," either. It was this long-winded text about how much I liked her and was hoping we'd hit it off. Needless to say, she left the group chat immediately, and the professor replied with, "Stick to biology, please." I wanted to drop out on the spot. Edit. Thanks to everyone who reassured me it could have been worse. Trust me, it felt like the end of the world at the time. Story 4. One of the most mortifying things I've done was in the middle of a quiet library. I was super tired from studying for finals and chugged this huge energy drink. Right in the middle of a dead silent study room, my stomach let out the loudest, most horrifying rumble ever. Everyone looked up from their books and stared. I tried to play it cool and just looked around like, what was that? But the look on my face probably gave me away, because everyone seemed to realize it was me. The worst part was that every time I tried to hold it in, the noise just kept getting louder and weirder. I left all my stuff, pretended to get a phone call, and walked out. Never went back to that study room again. Story 5. So I went to a fancy dinner for my friend's birthday. I wanted to look like I knew what I was doing, so I ordered this expensive steak and asked for it rare, because that's what I heard people who know their stuff say. When it came out, it was practically raw, and I had no idea it would be like that. I tried to eat it without making a face, but halfway through, I just couldn't. I nearly gagged in front of everyone, but they thought I was joking and started laughing. To make it worse, the waiter saw my face, looked concerned, and offered to cook it more. Everyone was watching, and I just nodded like, "Yes, please." Totally defeated. That night I realized I was definitely not cut out for fine dining. Edit. Okay, didn't expect this to be so relatable. Steak lovers, don't worry. I've since learned what I like and don't like. Medium well all the way. Story 6. I'm not sure anyone else has been in a situation this awkward. Back in high school, I was playing a basketball game, and in the middle of a fast break, my shorts somehow fell halfway down. I'm talking all the way to my knees. I was so focused on the game I didn't even notice until I heard the crowd laughing, and I looked down. It was like something out of a nightmare. I yanked them up as fast as I could, but my team was losing it, and I was so embarrassed I couldn't focus the rest of the game. To make things worse, the coach pulled me aside after and told me I needed to check my gear before playing. Yeah, thanks for that. Story 7. This one is horrifying. I was at a work event, and we were all dressed up. I was trying to make a good impression on my boss, who I'd just met. While talking to her, I leaned on this table to look casual, but I didn't realize it was one of those collapsible ones. I put all my weight on it, and the entire thing folded under me. Drinks, snacks, everything just crashed to the floor, and I went with it. I tried to act like it wasn't a big deal, but my face was redder than the wine I spilled. The worst part? My boss was standing there, just staring at me in shock. Let's just say I didn't get invited to the next company event. Edit. Lesson learned. Never trust those tables, especially around people you want to impress. Story 8. I had a nightmare date once that I wish I could completely erase from my life. I finally asked out this person I'd been crushing on for months, and we went to a nice restaurant. We were having a great time until I realized I had eaten something that really didn't agree with me. I thought I could make it through dinner, but halfway through my stomach was making the most insane noises. I excused myself to go to the bathroom, but when I came back, it got worse. I was sweating, my face probably looked green, and I could barely keep up a conversation. In the end, I had to admit defeat, apologize, and leave early. I never got a second date, and honestly, I don't blame them. Story 9. This happened years ago, but it still makes me cringe. I had a huge presentation at work, and I'd been working on it for weeks. Right before it started, I ran to the bathroom, but didn't realize my shirt got caught in my zipper. I walked back into the conference room and gave my entire presentation with my shirt tucked into my pants in the back. No one said a word, but when I finally noticed, I wanted to disappear on the spot. I left work early that day. Edit. Thanks for the solidarity, everyone. Office life really isn't forgiving. Story 10. Okay, so I used to work as a cashier at a grocery store. One day, this guy came through with a cart full of diapers and baby food, and I, trying to be friendly, said, "Oh, looks like you've got a little one at home." He just looked at me and said, "Actually, no, it's for me." I had no idea what to say. I thought he was joking and kind of laughed, but then he looked at me with the straightest face ever and said, "I have a condition." I froze, apologized, and tried to finish scanning as fast as possible. I've never felt so awkward in my life. Every time I see him in the store, I still want to hide. Story 11. This is one of those moments I wish could be erased forever. So, I was at this family wedding, right? I thought it'd be funny to start a dance battle with my little cousins. I had been practicing my breakdancing moves at home, which in reality were just a series of clumsy spins and weird arm movements. Anyway, I was feeling pretty confident and decided to pull out my signature move, a spin on the floor that I'd only ever done on carpet. As I spun, I accidentally kicked over a whole table of drinks, soaking my aunt's dress and half the guests nearby. Instead of laughter, there was just shocked silence, and my cousins looked horrified. My mom came over and just said, "Sit down, now." I spent the rest of the wedding in the corner, red as a tomato. Edit. Yes, my aunt forgave me. Eventually. She still jokes about it every family gathering, though. Story 12. Back in high school, I had this massive crush on one of my classmates. She was way out of my league, but I thought, why not? And wrote her a love letter. I put it in her locker one morning, signed, "Your secret admirer." That afternoon, I watched her open it with a group of friends around, and she burst out laughing, showing it to everyone. The worst part? They started guessing who wrote it, and somehow my best friend blurted out my name. I tried to deny it, but the look on my face gave it all away. She just looked at me, laughed awkwardly, and walked away. I spent the rest of high school avoiding her. 3:13. I was at a work conference where everyone was dressed in super formal clothes, and I was trying to make a good impression. I thought I was looking pretty sharp and got into this serious conversation with a group of executives. At one point, I went to adjust my tie and realized that my shirt had been unbuttoned almost to my stomach the whole time. I have no idea how long it had been like that, but it must have been obvious. Nobody said a word, but I could tell they all noticed. I just buttoned up as subtly as possible and tried to keep talking like nothing happened. Yeah, I don't think they were impressed. Edit. To everyone saying, check before you go out. Learned that the hard way. Thanks. Story 14. All right, so I was at a friend's party, and we decided to play charades. My turn came up, and I had to act out washing an elephant. I went all out, swinging my arms like I was scrubbing a massive animal, making exaggerated elephant sounds for some reason. People were laughing, so I thought I was killing it. But when I finished, I realized they weren't laughing with me. They were laughing because my pants had slowly slid down during my performance, and I didn't even notice. Let's just say my boxer shorts were on full display by the end. I wanted to dig a hole and crawl inside. Story 15. This is pretty mortifying, but here goes. I went out to eat with my boss and some clients at a nice restaurant. I was trying to look professional and ordered some soup as an appetizer. I went to take a sip of the broth, but instead I accidentally inhaled it through my nose. I had this full-on coughing fit, and soup was basically everywhere. I'm talking about spraying it all over the table, my clothes, and probably my boss. The waiter ran over with napkins, and I couldn't stop apologizing. Safe to say, I didn't make the best impression. Edit. It's been years, and my boss still mentions it every time we go out for lunch. 16. One of my worst memories happened right in the middle of a movie theater. I was on a first date, really trying to impress this girl. We'd bought popcorn, drinks, the works, and I was feeling pretty good about the night. We found our seats, and as I went to sit down, somehow I completely misjudged where the seat was. Instead of landing gracefully, I missed the chair altogether and fell straight onto the sticky theater floor. My drink spilled all over me, and half of the popcorn went flying across the aisle, hitting the people next to us. To make it worse, some people around us started clapping sarcastically, and I could feel my face burning with embarrassment. I looked up to see my date just staring at me, somewhere between disbelief and trying not to laugh. I awkwardly tried to laugh it off, but I was so embarrassed that I could barely look at her for the rest of the movie. The rest of the night was painfully awkward, and well, needless to say, there was no second date. Story 17. In college, I had to give a presentation in front of the entire class, and I was super nervous. When I got up to start, I realized I forgot my USB with the slideshow. I panicked and decided to try winging it, but in my nervousness, I accidentally called my professor Mom. There was dead silence, and then the entire class burst into laughter. The professor tried to brush it off, but I was so embarrassed I couldn't even finish my presentation properly. To this day, it's still one of my top "why did I do that" moments. Edit. I had to retake the class the next semester. That professor definitely remembered me. Story 18. This happened at my first job out of high school. I was working as a cashier, and a customer asked for help carrying some heavy bags to her car. I agreed and went to pick up the bags, but as I lifted them, my belt loop got caught on the counter. The loop ripped off, and my pants basically fell to my ankles right in front of her. I was so mortified I just grabbed the bags, muttered, "Sorry," and waddled out to her car trying to keep my pants up. She didn't say a word, but I never worked the register again after that day. Story 19. So, I was at a family reunion, and my cousins dared me to do a backflip on the trampoline in front of everyone. I'd never done one before, but I didn't want to back down, so I went for it. I somehow managed to do half a flip and landed face first on the ground, in the mud, with all my aunts, uncles, and cousins watching. My grandma just shook her head and said, "Should have known better." That line still haunts me to this day. Edit. Yeah, not my proudest moment. Turns out trampolines are a lot trickier than they look. Story 20. I once got caught in full concert mode in my car, and it's still one of my most embarrassing memories. I was stuck in traffic, windows down, blasting one of my favorite songs. You know that moment when you just forget the world around you and go all in on your personal karaoke session? Yeah, that was me. Belting out every note, adding all the dramatic hand gestures, totally lost in the music. Right as I hit this big high note, I suddenly noticed out of the corner of my eye that the driver in the car next to me was staring. His window was down too, and he looked both amused and slightly shocked by my impromptu performance. In a panic, I made the genius decision to keep singing, but louder, hoping he'd think I was just being funny on purpose. But the look on his face didn't change. If anything, he seemed even more amused. He just chuckled, shook his head, rolled up his window, and drove off when traffic moved. I was left sitting there, mortified, realizing I'd probably just given him a story to tell his friends. Now, every time I see someone singing in their car, I get instant second-hand embarrassment and remember my own little car concert disaster. Story 21. So one time I was trying to impress my crush by telling her I could juggle. Now, I've never juggled a day in my life, but for some reason, I thought I could just figure it out on the spot. She handed me 3 oranges, and I went for it. The first orange flew straight up, but the second one flew sideways and hit someone else. By the time the third orange was in the air, I had completely lost control, and all 3 oranges ended up rolling across the floor. My crush just looked at me like, "Really?" and walked away laughing. I definitely should have practiced before making that bold claim. Story 22. Back in high school, I was sitting in my history class, totally zoned out, probably daydreaming about what I'd do after school. The class was going on around me, but I wasn't paying attention at all. Suddenly, I felt this awkward silence, and I snapped back to reality to see the teacher and the whole class staring at me. Apparently, it was my turn to answer a question, and I had missed the entire context. Panicked, and with no idea what was being discussed, I just blurted out the first historical figure that popped into my head. George Washington! I thought maybe I'd get lucky and somehow be right. Unfortunately, I was nowhere close. Turns out the question had been about which country invented pasta. The whole class burst into laughter, and even the teacher couldn't help but chuckle as he said, "Well, that's one way to look at it." I wanted to disappear right then and there, but I had to sit through the rest of class with my friends still giggling beside me. To this day, whenever we have pasta, my friends love to remind me of my answer, saying things like, "Shout out to George Washington for bringing us spaghetti." Story 23. I was at a family Thanksgiving, and we were all sharing what we were grateful for. It was my turn, and I meant to say something simple, but I ended up getting emotional and started tearing up. Before I knew it, I was full-on ugly crying in front of everyone, and the entire family went silent, staring at me like I'd just lost it. My cousin tried to pat me on the back, but I was too embarrassed to even look at anyone. Now, every Thanksgiving, they remind me of my little emotional speech, and I just laugh it off. But deep down, I wish I could erase that moment. Edit. Reading all these comments is actually pretty comforting. Glad to know I'm not the only one who's lost it in front of family. Story 24. Once I decided to hit the gym with my friend, who's a total fitness junkie and lives for his daily workouts. He convinced me to try deadlifting, talking about how it's the ultimate test of strength. Now, I had no clue what I was doing, but I didn't want to look weak, so I stacked on way more weight than I could realistically handle. I chalked up my hands, got into position, and tried to lift like I'd seen in videos. But the second I started to pull, I felt my legs wobble. My knees buckled, and before I knew it, I collapsed in a heap, dropping the weights with a loud, echoing clang. The noise was so loud it seemed like the entire gym stopped to look at me, and I felt every pair of eyes on me as I scrambled to get up. To make it worse, a trainer rushed over, looking genuinely concerned, while my friend stood there laughing so hard he could barely breathe. I tried to laugh along, but I was absolutely mortified. I muttered an apology to the trainer and pretended like it was no big deal. But inside, I wanted to disappear. I haven't set foot in a gym since that day, and now I stick to workouts that don't involve public displays of strength or potential public humiliation. Story 25. In college, I was in this small philosophy class, and one day we were having this deep discussion about life and death. I meant to say something like, "Life is short," but instead I blurted out, "Life is shirt." Everyone, including the professor, just stopped and looked at me. I could feel my face turning red, but I tried to play it cool and added, "Yeah, like a really tight shirt." My professor just sighed, and the whole class erupted in laughter. It took weeks to live that down. Edit. Yeah, I've since learned to think before I speak. Lessons learned, folks. Story 26. This one's rough. My girlfriend at the time was introducing me to her family for the first time, and I was so nervous. When her mom asked what my parents did for a living, I completely blanked and accidentally said my dad was an astronaut. He's not even close to being an astronaut. He's a dentist. The whole family just looked at me like I'd lost my mind, and my girlfriend was like, "Wait, what?" I had no idea why I said that, but it was too late to take it back. Let's just say her parents didn't exactly think I was boyfriend material after that. Story 27. I was at a wedding with my girlfriend, and we were seated at this really fancy table with her friends. Everything was going smoothly. Good conversation, delicious food, and I was feeling pretty confident about making a good impression. Then, dessert came around, and they served these elegant chocolate mousse cups. I love chocolate, so I got a little too excited and scooped up a big spoonful, eager to dive in. But as I went to take a bite, I realized too late that the mousse had been frozen solid. Instead of melting in my mouth, it made this horrifying crunch, and I felt my front tooth chip right off. Everyone at the table heard it, and I just sat there, frozen, too embarrassed to even react. My girlfriend looked at me, her eyes widening as she realized what had happened. I tried to laugh it off, but all I could think about was the gap in my smile. The rest of the night, I found myself covering my mouth whenever I laughed or smiled, feeling way too self-conscious. My girlfriend's friends were super polite, pretending not to notice, but I could see a few amused glances my way. Needless to say, it wasn't exactly the impression I wanted to leave. Story 28. In middle school, I was trying to look cool at lunch, and I thought it would be hilarious to pop open a can of soda with one hand. I didn't realize I was shaking it in the process, so when I finally cracked it open, it sprayed all over me, my food, and the people sitting nearby. My crush, who was sitting right next to me, just looked at me and laughed while I sat there, drenched in soda. It's safe to say I was not the cool kid that day. Edit. Yes, soda spray was worse than it sounds. My clothes were sticky the whole day. Lesson learned. Story 29. I was at a friend's house for a sleepover, and we decided to watch a horror movie. I usually don't get scared, and I'd been bragging all night about how horror movies didn't faze me. I figured I'd impress everyone by staying cool through the whole thing. But, as luck would have it, there was this one jump scare that came out of nowhere and caught me completely off guard. I let out the most ridiculous, high-pitched scream, like way higher and louder than I even thought possible. The room went dead silent for a second, and then all my friends just burst out laughing. They thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard and immediately started teasing me about it. My friends wouldn't let me live it down and even made me reenact the scream multiple times so they could record it. To this day, whenever we hang out, one of them will randomly bring up the scream or even play the video they saved. It's become this ongoing joke that just won't die. They've even shown it to other people, and now even people who weren't there know me for that one embarrassing scream. I laugh along, but deep down, I kind of wish I could erase that night from everyone's memory, especially mine. Story 30. This one's embarrassing to even type. So, I was at a job interview for a position I really wanted, and it was going great, until the interviewer offered me water. I thought it would be rude to say no, so I took a sip. But as I was putting the glass down, I knocked it over, spilling water all over their desk and some important-looking papers. I tried to apologize, but I was so flustered I just ended up mumbling nonsense. Needless to say, I didn't get the job, and I avoid drinking water in interviews now. Edit. For everyone saying it's not that bad, trust me, I still think about it every time I apply for a new job. Story 31. Back in high school, I thought it would be cool to join the theater club, even though I'd never acted in my life. I ended up getting a small part, but it had this one intense monologue. On opening night, I was so nervous I completely blanked on the lines. Instead of pausing or just trying to improvise, I randomly started reciting the Pledge of Allegiance because it was the only thing I could remember on the spot. The entire audience was silent, and my fellow actors were staring at me like, "What the heck?" I wanted the stage to just swallow me up. Edit. Fun fact, I never acted again. Theater life was not for me. Story 32. So, I was at this big family dinner with my girlfriend's family, and I was trying really hard to make a good impression. At one point, her mom asked if anyone wanted more mashed potatoes. I was so nervous, I accidentally said, "I love you." Silence. Everyone looked at me, and her dad just raised an eyebrow. I quickly followed up with, I love mashed potatoes." They all laughed it off, but my girlfriend teased me about it for weeks. 333. In college, I went to a karaoke night with a bunch of friends. I got up to sing, feeling pretty confident, and chose a song I knew all the words to. But when the music started, I realized the lyrics were totally different from what I'd practiced. Apparently, I'd picked the wrong version of the song. I tried to improvise, but it was a complete disaster. People started booing, and one guy actually yelled, "Stick to studying." It was brutal. Story 34. One time at work, I was sitting in a conference room with my boss and a few co-workers, waiting for a client to join us on a video call. It was one of those long, awkward waits where no one really talks. So I started humming a silly song from a cartoon that my niece had been obsessed with. I didn't even realize I was doing it. I was just absent-mindedly humming to myself. A few seconds in, I heard my boss clear his throat and say, "We can all hear you?" I froze, realizing my mic was on, and looked up at the screen. Every single face was staring at me, and a few of my co-workers looked like they were desperately trying not to laugh. I went bright red and mumbled something about not realizing the mic was on, as I fumbled to mute myself. The rest of the meeting was a blur because I was so embarrassed. I just sat there, trying to keep a straight face, but I could still see a few smirks whenever anyone glanced my way. Let's just say I kept a very low profile for the rest of the day. Now every time I join a video call, I triple-check that my mic is off until I'm absolutely sure I need to speak. Edit. Yeah, lesson learned. Always double-check that mute button. Story 35. At my cousin's wedding, I thought I'd be funny and do the worm on the dance floor. I'd never actually done it before, but in my head it seemed easy enough. As soon as I tried, I felt this sharp pain and realized I'd basically face-planted into the ground in front of everyone. A few people cheered, probably thinking it was part of the dance, but I spent the rest of the night nursing a bruised chin and ego. Story 36. One time in high school, I had one of those painfully awkward moments that still makes me cringe to this day. I was totally zoned out in class, not really paying attention, and when the teacher called on me to answer a question, I instinctively responded with, "Yes, Dad?" The second the word left my mouth, I froze, feeling my face turn red as I realized what I'd just said in front of the entire class. It was one of those moments where you wish the floor would open up and swallow you whole. I was hoping that maybe he'd just brush it off and move on quickly. But nope, he had other plans. My teacher, without missing a beat, looked at me with a totally straight face and said, "Well, son, let's move on." That was it. The entire class lost it, laughing so hard they could barely breathe. I tried to laugh along, but I was absolutely mortified. From that day on, I couldn't escape the nickname Teacher's Kid. Every time I walked into class, someone would make a joke about me and my dad. Even other teachers found out, and a few of them joined in on the teasing whenever they saw me in the hall. I spent the rest of the year dodging jokes and wishing I could take that one slip of the tongue back. Story 37. When I was a kid, I was really into magic tricks and tried to impress my family by pulling a rabbit out of a hat. Except I didn't have a rabbit or a real hat, so I stuffed one of my stuffed animals under a baseball cap. During the trick, I accidentally dropped the cap, and my little stuffed dog rolled out in front of everyone. They laughed so hard I almost started crying. I quit my magic career right then and there. Edit. Reading these comments, maybe I'll give magic another shot, but probably not. Story 38. Once, during a huge presentation for my college class, I realized halfway through that my fly was down. I tried to casually zip it up while still talking, but I ended up making the loudest zip sound possible, which echoed in the room. Everyone looked up from their notes and just stared at me. My professor actually chuckled, which made it even worse. I was mortified. Story 39. I was on a first date and we decided to go to a fancy seafood restaurant. I was trying to impress her, so I ordered the lobster, thinking it would make me look sophisticated. But when it arrived, I had no idea how to eat it and ended up flinging lobster meat all over the table. My date was so polite, but I could tell she was horrified. After that, I just stuck to pasta on first dates. Edit. Everyone saying I should have practiced with a crab first. Fair point. Story 40. I had this job interview once that was going surprisingly well. I'd answered all the questions confidently, felt like I'd connected with the interviewer, and was sure I had a good chance at landing the position. Everything was on point until the very end, when we stood up to shake hands. Somehow, in that split second, my coordination just vanished. I reached out, aiming for a firm handshake, but completely missed their hand and ended up smacking my palm right into their wrist. There was this awkward pause as we both processed what had just happened, and I could feel my face heating up. Trying to laugh it off, I blurted out, "Sorry, missed," with this nervous chuckle. The interviewer gave a polite laugh, but I could tell the moment had thrown both of us off. I tried to recover with a quick, "Thank you for your time," but I walked out of the room knowing that awkward handshake was likely the last impression I'd left. Sure enough, a few days later, I got the email saying they went with another candidate. To this day, I can't shake the embarrassment whenever I think back on that moment, and I'm overly cautious about handshakes now. Even a simple handshake practice with friends reminds me of that cringeworthy miss, and it still stings. Story 41. At a big family reunion, we had a karaoke setup, and everyone was having a great time taking turns. My grandma got up and did the cutest rendition of Sweet Caroline you can imagine. She was off-key and a little off-beat, but everyone cheered like it was the best performance ever. It was one of those moments that made the whole night feel special, and people were still clapping for her as she sat down. Feeling a bit inspired, I thought it would be hilarious to go in the complete opposite direction and pick something intense. So I chose Bohemian Rhapsody, thinking it'd be epic and unexpected. As soon as I started, I got really into it, rocking out way more than I should have. I was headbanging, throwing my hands up, full rock star mode. But in my excitement, I didn't notice the speaker stand right behind me. Mid-song, I swung my arm out and accidentally hit it, sending it crashing to the floor with a huge bang. The music cut off immediately, and suddenly there was just this stunned silence. Everyone, including my grandma, was staring at me with a mix of surprise and confusion. I stood there holding the mic, totally frozen, realizing my big moment had turned into an epic fail. Needless to say, Grandma's Sweet Caroline was the true star performance of the night, and I learned karaoke might not be my calling. Edit. Safe to say, karaoke isn't my thing. Story 42. One time in college, I was studying in the library and listening to music with my headphones on. I got really into the song and didn't realize I was singing out loud. When I looked up, I saw a group of people across from me laughing, and one of them actually started clapping. Turns out I had been belting out the chorus of Livin' on a Prayer for everyone in the quiet study area to hear. I packed up and left as quickly as possible. Story 43. I was at my first professional conference, and I wanted to make a good impression. At lunch, I went to sit at a table with some executives, and as I went to pull out a chair, I somehow missed and sat right on the floor. Everyone looked over, and I quickly scrambled back up, pretending like it didn't happen. But I was mortified. I spent the rest of the conference avoiding that group. Story 44. When I was in middle school, I had this massive crush on one of my classmates. I tried to impress her by pulling out this cool card trick I'd been practicing. But right when I was about to reveal the last card, I got so nervous that I fumbled the whole deck, and all the cards spilled onto the floor. She looked down, laughed, and walked away. Safe to say, I didn't get her number. Edit. Card tricks are still not my thing, but at least I can laugh about it now. Story 45. One time, I was out with my friends at a pizza place. and I was trying to show off by eating a slice in one huge bite. Just as I went to take a big bite, the hot cheese stretched out and slapped me right in the face, burning my chin and making a mess. My friends laughed so hard they couldn't breathe, and I spent the rest of the meal with a bright red spot on my face. Lesson learned: don't challenge pizza. Story 46. I was at my cousin's wedding and thought it would be fun to catch the bouquet. When they threw it, I went for it with everything I had, but I ended up tripping over my own feet and falling face first into the crowd of bridesmaids. I didn't catch the bouquet, and my cousin got the whole thing on video. Every time there's a family gathering, they love to replay it and remind me of my great catch. Story 47. In high school, I was trying to look cool in front of some friends by leaning back in my chair. I leaned back a little too far, and the chair tipped over, taking me with it. I landed flat on my back in the middle of the classroom, and the teacher just sighed and said, "That's why we don't lean back, kids." The whole class laughed, and my pride was pretty bruised for the rest of the day. Story 48. At our company holiday party, I decided to fully embrace the spirit and showed up in one of those classic ugly Christmas sweaters, the kind with flashing lights, tinsel, and way too much cheer crammed into one piece of clothing. It had a battery pack that powered the lights, and I thought it'd be funny and festive, a little conversation starter. Everything was going great at first. People laughed, took photos, and complimented the sweater. I was actually feeling pretty proud of my outfit choice, until I started dancing. About halfway through the night, as I got a bit more into the music, I felt something shift in my sweater. I looked down and realized the battery pack had somehow slipped loose and was now dangling out, bouncing around every time I moved. Thinking I could quickly fix it, I tried to shove the pack back into the pocket, but it just made things worse. The lights went haywire, flashing even brighter and faster, like a mini disco ball attached to my chest. My co-workers thought it was the funniest thing and kept pointing and laughing, saying I was lighting up the dance floor. I tried to play along, but inside, I was mortified. I spent the rest of the night trying to keep a low profile, hanging in the back and staying as still as possible, to avoid drawing more attention to the malfunctioning light show I'd become. Edit. To everyone saying, own it. I'm still trying to figure out how to own a sweater that turns you into a blinking Christmas beacon. Story 49. This one still makes me cringe. I was at a friend's graduation party, and after enjoying a bit too much of the celebratory punch, I decided it would be a great idea to give a toast. In my head, I was ready to deliver something really moving and memorable. I pictured myself saying this profound speech about friendship, success, and the future, and I figured everyone would be talking about it for years. So I stood up, cleared my throat, and raised my glass, feeling all eyes on me. But the second I opened my mouth, it was like my brain just blanked out. I stumbled over my words, couldn't remember anything I'd planned to say, and after an awkward pause, all that came out was, "Here's to stuff!" The room burst out laughing, and I could feel my face turning bright red as I quickly sat down. I tried to laugh along, but I was mortified that my big speech had turned into an awkward one-liner. My friend still loves to bring up my legendary toast anytime we're with mutual friends, always making sure to reenact my blank expression and half-hearted, "Here's to stuff." Now it's an inside joke among our group, and every time we're at a party or someone mentions a toast, they look my way like I'm about to deliver another masterpiece. I laugh it off now, but man, I wish I could redo that moment. Story 50. Once, during a school assembly, I was sitting in the front row, and I dozed off. At one point, I let out a loud snore, and the entire room burst out laughing. I woke up, totally disoriented, and realized the principal had stopped talking to look directly at me. I wanted to crawl under my chair and disappear. Safe to say, I stayed wide awake for every assembly after that. Story 51. In college, I was working as a server at a local restaurant. One evening, a big group came in, and I was trying to be super professional. I was pouring water into one of their glasses and got distracted by their conversation. I didn't realize I'd kept pouring until the glass overflowed, spilling water all over the table. The whole group looked at me, and one of them just said, "Little nervous, huh?" I awkwardly laughed, cleaned it up, and tried to disappear for the rest of their meal. Story 52. Once, I was at a theme park with friends, and we were getting onto a roller coaster. I thought I was being funny and yelled, "Let's go!" right as we took off. But as soon as we hit the first drop, I started screaming like a baby. My friends were cracking up the entire ride while I was desperately holding on, looking like I was in actual pain. To this day, they bring it up every time we go on any ride, saying, "Ready to let's go again?" Story 53. At a school dance, I decided to wear these new shoes that were way too slippery. During a fast song, I was trying to show off some moves, and next thing I knew, I slipped and wiped out, taking down a few other people with me. The DJ actually stopped the music for a second, and everyone stared. I wanted to get up and laugh it off, but I was so embarrassed I just stayed on the floor for a few seconds, pretending I was resting. Yeah, it was rough. Edit. I've since learned to test out new shoes at home first. Rookie mistake. Story 54. My first day at my new job, I was trying to make a good impression by getting to know people. I was chatting with one of my co-workers and trying to be friendly, asked her if she was the one from the holiday party photos. Turns out that wasn't her. And worse, she didn't even go to the party. She just looked at me, totally confused, while I tried to explain, digging myself deeper. Not my smoothest first impression. Story 55. This is probably my most embarrassing moment ever. I was out walking my dog in the park, just enjoying the fresh air, when I happened to run into a girl I'd just started dating. She looked great, totally put together, and I wanted to play it cool. So, trying to impress her with how well-behaved my dog was, I casually let him off the leash, figuring he'd stick close and trot around like the obedient pup I'd imagined he was. But the second I unclipped the leash, he bolted, full speed, straight toward the pond on the other side of the path. Before I could react, he leapt into the water, making a huge splash, and then, as if in slow motion, charged back toward us, dripping with muddy water. Just as I turned to apologize, he shook himself off, spraying us both from head to toe in mud. My clothes, hair, everything was soaked, and the look on her face was not amused, to say the least. I tried to laugh it off and make some joke about my dog's enthusiasm for life, but she was clearly not thrilled. She just said, "Well, I guess I'll let you guys finish your walk," and walked off without another word. I was left standing there, dripping mud, looking like a complete fool. Let's just say, I didn't get another date with her after that. Story 56. In high school, I decided to join the track team, thinking it would be a fun way to try something new and maybe meet a few friends. I'd never really run before, but I figured I'd get the hang of it. My first meet was a relay, and I was feeling a mix of excitement and nerves as I waited for my teammate to pass me the baton. When it was finally my turn, I took off with all the energy I had. But in the heat of the moment, I completely missed the handoff and just kept running, clutching the baton all by myself. I didn't even realize my mistake. I thought everything was going smoothly and felt pretty proud of myself for sprinting so fast. It wasn't until I was halfway around the track that I started noticing the shouting. I glanced around and saw my coach and teammates waving their arms, yelling at me to come back. That's when it hit me. I was supposed to hand off the baton after my turn. Mortified, I awkwardly jogged back, holding out the baton to my teammate, who was clearly not amused. The whole team looked disappointed, and I felt like I'd single-handedly ruined our chances. Let's just say, I didn't exactly make it to the next meet, and my brief track career ended before it even began. Story 57. One summer, I was at a pool party, and someone dared me to do a cannonball off the diving board. I got a big running start, but as I jumped, I slipped and did this awkward half-dive, half-fall into the pool. The splash was weak, and I ended up with a red face and a stinging belly. The worst part? Everyone was recording it, so now there's video evidence of my epic fail floating around. Edit. Yep, belly flops hurt more than you'd think. My pride still hurts more, though. Story 58. At a family dinner, I was trying to sound smart and bring up a recent news article I'd read, Halfway through explaining it, I realized I completely misunderstood the story and got all the facts wrong. My uncle, who actually knew the topic, called me out on every detail. The whole table was laughing, and I just sat there, wishing I could melt into my chair. Now I double-check my facts before opening my mouth. Story 59. I was at a friend's art gallery opening, and I was trying to look knowledgeable about the pieces on display. I started giving my opinion on this one abstract painting, saying it was a bit too experimental. My friend, who'd brought me to the event, looked at me and said, that's actually the fire extinguisher with a cover over it. I couldn't leave fast enough. It's safe to say I'm not exactly an art critic. Story 60. One time I got up early to go to a yoga class for the first time. I was trying really hard to follow along, but during one of the poses I lost my balance and fell over, taking out the mat of the person next to me. The instructor rushed over, and I could feel everyone staring. I finished the class, but I've never gone back to that studio. I think I'm better suited for solo workouts after that. Story 61. In high school, I tried out for the cheerleading team to impress a girl I liked. During one of the routines, I decided to show off and attempted a backflip I'd only ever done on a trampoline. Spoiler alert, I landed flat on my face. The whole gym went silent for a second, then erupted in laughter. The girl I was trying to impress? She looked horrified. Safe to say, my cheerleading career ended that day. Story 62. I once went to a dinner party with a bunch of my girlfriend's family members, and I was pretty nervous, hoping to make a solid first impression. The table was filled with all kinds of fancy dishes, and everyone was talking about the food, so I figured I'd just go along with it. At one point, they brought out these small, shiny shells with something slimy and grayish inside, and everyone around the table seemed pretty excited. I had no idea what it was, but I thought, hey, if they're all into it, it's probably good. So I grabbed one, trying to act confident, and took a big bite without asking any questions. Turns out, it was a raw oyster, and the taste hit me like a wave. It was cold, briny, and had this weird rubbery texture that made me feel like I just swallowed a mouthful of seawater. I could barely hold back my gag reflex and almost spit it out, but I managed to keep a straight face. Or at least tried to. Everyone noticed my reaction immediately, and one of my girlfriend's relatives asked if I was okay. My face must have looked like I'd just seen a ghost. I didn't want to seem rude, so I just forced a smile and said, "Oh, I guess I'm just not a fan of oysters." They all laughed, and from then on, every time we had family dinners, someone would jokingly offer me oysters, saying, "Hey, maybe you'll like them this time." I tried to laugh along, but deep down, I still cringe thinking about it. Now, anytime I see oysters on a menu, I steer way clear. Story 63. I went to a haunted house with friends, and I was determined to act brave. Halfway through, this guy in a creepy mask jumped out, and I let out the highest-pitched scream you could imagine. My friends were laughing so hard they were crying, and the actor actually broke character to laugh too. They still call me Scream Queen whenever Halloween comes around. Edit. Apparently, I'm not the only one who can't keep their cool in haunted houses. Solidarity. Story 64. One time, I went to my professor's office hours to ask for extra credit. I was really nervous and wanted to make a good impression, but as I was leaving, I tried to say, "Thank you, Professor," and somehow it came out as, "Thank you, Precious." We both froze. I quickly mumbled, "See you in class," and ran out. I could barely look him in the eyes for the rest of the semester. Story 65. I had a Zoom interview during the pandemic, and I wanted to look professional, so I dressed up. Halfway through, I adjusted my camera and realized that my professional look only applied from the waist up. I'd forgotten I was wearing pajama pants with cartoon characters on them. The interviewer noticed and chuckled, and I awkwardly explained that I like to keep it casual. Didn't get the job, and I still cringe every time I think about it. Story 66. At my first college party, I thought I'd impress everyone by chugging a drink as fast as possible. Except I wasn't used to carbonated drinks, and I ended up burping loudly right in the middle of the room. People looked at me like I'd committed a crime, and my crush was there too. Let's just say my first party wasn't quite the entrance I'd planned. Edit. I'm not a burper by nature, trust me. It was a special occasion, apparently. Story 67. One day, I was helping my friend move into his new apartment. I picked up a box labeled books that turned out to be way heavier than I thought. Trying to act like it was no big deal, I lifted it too quickly and ended up falling backward with the box on top of me. My friend and his roommate were laughing so hard they couldn't help, so I just lay there, trapped under books. I've never offered to help someone move since. Story 68. When I was a kid, I went to a science fair and entered with this model volcano that I thought was the coolest thing ever. During my demonstration, I used way too much baking soda and vinegar, and the volcano exploded all over me and the judge. I was covered in this gross foam, and my parents just stood there laughing. To make it worse, I didn't even win. It was my first and last science fair, for sure. Story 69. I was at my cousin's wedding, sitting in the middle of a packed room while they exchanged vows. It was a beautiful moment. Everyone was silent, totally focused on the bride and groom. But then, right in the middle of the vows, my phone suddenly started blasting a pop song at full volume. I had completely forgotten to put it on silent, and of course, it had to choose the most dramatic part of the ceremony to go off. I fumbled around in a panic, scrambling to turn it off, but my fingers felt like they'd forgotten how to work a phone. By the time I finally silenced it, the damage was done. The entire room had turned to look at me, including the bride and groom, who were trying to keep straight faces. To make matters worse, my aunt later came up to me at the reception and jokingly thanked me for trying to add a soundtrack to the wedding. She told the whole story to a few of my other relatives, and soon I had a small crowd of family members teasing me about my DJ skills. Now, every time there's a family event, someone brings up that story, making sure to remind me not to bring any bonus tracks to the occasion. I still get embarrassed just thinking about it, and I make sure my phone is dead silent before any major event now. Story 70. One day, I was walking my dog in the park, and this other dog came up, clearly interested in mine. I was trying to make small talk with the other dog owner, and I thought it would be funny to say, "Looks like they're on a date." Turns out the person I said it to was the other dog owner's ex, and they both gave me the most awkward look. I just mumbled, "Have a nice day," and walked away as fast as possible. Story 71. I was at the airport waiting to board a flight and decided to lean back in my chair with my headphones on. I must have drifted off because next thing I know, I jerked awake, accidentally letting out a loud, "What's going on?" Everyone around me just stared. The guy next to me told me the boarding hadn't even started yet. I tried to laugh it off, but I'm pretty sure everyone thought I was either terrified of flying or just strange. Story 72. Back in high school, I had a presentation in front of the entire class. I was super nervous and accidentally said, "Good morning," instead of "good morning" to start. Everyone was confused, so I tried to play it off by explaining that every day is a little sad, which only made things weirder. My classmates laughed, and I spent the rest of the presentation trying to recover from that dark introduction. Let's just say my public speaking skills weren't quite ready. Story 73. I once attended a fancy dinner with my boss and some clients. To fit in, I tried to act like I knew how to eat the complicated seafood dishes they served. But when the lobster came, I had no clue what I was doing. I accidentally launched a piece of lobster meat across the table and hit one of the clients. The whole table just watched in horror as I mumbled an apology. Safe to say, I wasn't invited to the next client dinner. Edit. I've since learned to stick with easier dishes in formal settings. Lesson learned. Story 74. During my first week at college, I wanted to seem cool and independent. I walked into a huge lecture hall, saw some familiar faces, and confidently sat down. After a few minutes, I realized none of them were actually my friends, and I was in the wrong class. I tried to casually gather my things and leave, but everyone noticed. I'm pretty sure some people still remember me as the random guy who walked out of Intro to Economics. Story 75. I was volunteering at an animal shelter, and they asked me to introduce one of the dogs to potential adopters. I was trying to explain how friendly the dog was, but right as I said, she's super calm and gentle. The dog yanked on the leash and pulled me to the ground. I got up, covered in mud, while the adopters looked horrified. They ended up adopting her anyway, but I was definitely not the calm and professional volunteer I hoped to be. Story 76. One time I was at a friend's birthday party and they were doing this big toast. I thought it would be a good idea to make a joke, so I said, "Here's to another year of regretting life choices." But the room got dead quiet, and everyone just stared at me. Turns out my friend had just gone through a breakup and was definitely not in the mood for jokes about regrets. I spent the rest of the night trying to stay invisible. Story 77. I was at the gym during peak hours, and it was packed, so finding any equipment free was like winning the lottery. I spotted this really nice weight bench just sitting there, and without thinking, I hurried over, worried someone else would grab it if I hesitated. In my rush, I misjudged my landing and ended up sitting right on the edge. Before I even knew what was happening, the whole bench flipped backward with a loud crash, sending me sprawling onto the floor. It felt like the sound echoed through the entire gym, and I swear everyone stopped what they were doing to stare at me. I quickly scrambled to my feet, trying to laugh it off, but my face was burning with embarrassment. The worst part was that I tried to look casual, like it was no big deal, but I could see people smirking as they turned back to their own workouts. Even a trainer looked like he was trying not to laugh, which somehow made it even worse. I went through the rest of my session feeling so self-conscious, glancing around to make sure no one was still watching. From that day on, I always double-check before sitting on anything in the gym, making sure I'm fully centered and stable. One moment of distraction was all it took for my smooth gym reputation to shatter in front of everyone. Edit. To everyone who says this has happened to them too, thanks. Makes me feel a bit better about it. Story 78. At a job orientation, we were all supposed to introduce ourselves with a fun fact. I panicked because I didn't prepare anything, so I blurted out, "I can juggle," even though I'd never juggled in my life. The manager immediately asked me to demonstrate, so I grabbed a few markers and tried to wing it. Needless to say, I failed miserably and ended up dropping all the markers. Everyone just stared at me, and I wanted to disappear on the spot. Story 79. When I was in elementary school, I was so excited to go to my first sleepover at my friend's house. We stayed up late telling scary stories, but I got so spooked that I ended up calling my mom to come pick me up. The next day at school, all my friends called me Scaredy Cat and wouldn't let me live it down for the rest of the year. I've since toughened up, but man, that nickname still haunts me. Story 80. One winter, I was walking on a slippery sidewalk and saw my crush coming toward me. I tried to look cool and say hi, but right as I raised my hand to wave, I slipped and fell backward into a pile of snow. My crush was nice enough to help me up, but the whole thing was so embarrassing that I could barely look at her. She still jokes about my graceful entrance every time it snows.